Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Chelo Montoya, and I'm the Assistant Vice President of Adult Education and Public Programs at LACMA. I am thrilled to present today's program, Poetry in Color, a virtual slam inspired by the life and legacy of Biddy Mason. This is the fourth season of Poetry in Color at LACMA, which is created by Tanya Ingram, who is also featured today. The program is presented in conjunction with Monumental Perspectives, a multi-year initiative between SNAP and LACMA with additional support from the Mellon Foundation. In an effort to reflect a richer, more inclusive history, Monumental Perspectives highlight stories of Los Angeles communities and beyond through augmented reality. Today, you will learn more about Biddy Mason's story and the AR monument entitled The Open Hand is Blessed, created by Ada Pinkston, with a special introduction by Cheryl Cox, a descendant of Biddy Mason. It also happens to be Biddy Mason's birthday, which is another great reason to celebrate. I also encourage you to check out the AR monuments, which you can view on the SNAP app at their respective locations across Los Angeles, or you could also view it wherever you are. For more information, you can look at lacma.org and find our projects on the Monumental Perspectives page. And it is now my pleasure to introduce your program host, Tyree Boyd-Pates, who is the Associate Curator of Western History at the Autry Museum of the American West. You are in great company and will most certainly be inspired by the people and poems you will hear today. Please enjoy the program.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tyree Boyd-Pates, the Associate Curator of Western History at the Autry Museum, and I'm so delighted to be with you all today because we are going to relish and uplift the memory and name of Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason and I has intersected with my work profoundly over the last several years, and I am someone who is a deep advocate for many of the principles that she espoused. But beyond just discussing her historicity, I always like to make sure that those can get connected to legacy through the descendants. So now I would like to present Cheryl Cox, the direct descendant of Biddy Mason, to discuss the history and importance of Biddy Mason to the city of Los Angeles and abroad. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Cox, and I am the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason was born a slave on August 15, 1818. She eventually became one of the first pioneers of Los Angeles, as well as a successful real estate entrepreneur, a midwife, a nurse, and a philanthropist. She was a remarkable woman who accomplished unbelievable feats during a time that was unheard of for people of color, or even a woman at that time. Biddy was born into slavery, and in her 20s, she was given as a wedding present to Rebecca and Robert Smith. When Robert Smith converted to Mormonism, he decided he wanted to move his family from Mississippi to Utah because he wanted to be a part of starting or establishing a new Mormon community. As a slave, Biddy was forced to walk behind her master's wagon from Mississippi to Utah. And after a few years in Utah, Robert Smith then decided he wanted to join the gold rush in California and eventually traveled with some other Mormons from Utah to start yet another religious settlement in California, meaning Biddy had to walk from Utah to Southern California through the desert and all the other spectacular terrain. Biddy walked more than 2,000 miles in unbelievable weather and horrible conditions, all while herding livestock, tending to her slave masters, his ailing wife, their children, and caring for her own 3 young children, Ellen, Ann, and Harriet. In 1851, she arrived in Southern California. After a few years, Robert Smith decided he wanted to move again, but this time it was Texas. Biddy was informed that California was a free state by other free blacks living in the area, and she realized that maybe she didn't have to move. She decided she was going to fight to stay in California. In 1856, through the Los Angeles County Court, she successfully fought for and won her freedom. And not just her freedom, but the freedom of all the slaves of Robert Smith. This was a tremendous accomplishment for her, and it happened a full year before Dred Scott's decision. Dred Scott was a man who attempted to sue the state for his freedom and the freedom of his family in 1857, but he lost. During Biddy's time as a slave, she learned the trade of midwifery. And after being freed, she decided to hone her skills even further by securing a job as a midwife and a nurse with Dr. John S. Griffin. Biddy Mason is considered an early Black pioneer of medicine. Biddy saved her money for 10 whole years to buy her first piece of property on Spring Street. She eventually amassed great wealth by the time of her death in 1891. She was a real estate mogul, owning much of Los Angeles at the time. Now that part of Los Angeles is known as downtown LA, and was considered the richest Black woman west of the Mississippi. Despite all her wealth, she continued to serve her community. She overcame the color barrier while medically treating anyone in need, Black and white alike, as well as those no one else wanted to help, such as prisoners during smallpox epidemics. She gave shelter to the homeless and fed the hungry. During disasters, leaving open tabs at markets and offering foster care for children who lost their families. Biddy was a wise and compassionate woman who fought to uplift her community, a servant leader, a leader who led her community through her service to the community. She was strong-willed and tenacious. She gave to those in need and put her life at risk to help anybody, regardless of their status in life. She had a strong belief in God, which is why she led the founding of a church. Biddy Mason was an American hero, a pioneer, a trailblazer, and because of all these qualities, she was a living legend in Los Angeles during her time, being called Grandma Biddy or Aunt Biddy throughout the city. And that is why she became known as the grandmother of Los Angeles. Los Angeles was her community. It was her family. Grandma Biddy would see a need and always try to fulfill it. There wasn't schools for Blacks to go to, so she helped build one. Being the God-fearing woman that she was, there wasn't a church for Blacks to worship in, and FAME, the first African Methodist Episcopal Church, was born, which to this day is the largest Black church in Los Angeles and the first Black church in Los Angeles. She was there to help everybody and was always willing to give assistance to anybody. There were always people lining up around the corner to see Grandma Biddy, and she never wanted to turn anybody away. Grandma Biddy had a saying, "If you hold your hand closed, nothing good can come in. The open hand is blessed, for it gives in abundance even as it receives," which was actually based off a biblical principle. God will bless those who help others. This belief would become our family motto. Because of her work and her philanthropy, each generation of our family has kept her legacy alive in a multitude of ways. But her life's philosophy was our family's inspiration for starting the Biddy Mason Foundation that honors Grandma Biddy today. Because she was a pioneer in medicine, the foundation participates in annual medical missions across the world. To honor her schools, we donate hundreds of backpacks filled with school supplies to homeless children's programs across the country. To honor the church Grandma Biddy founded, we participate in a multitude of church programs that provide programming for the underprivileged. Grandma Biddy lived without judgment and was always willing to help anyone in need. As a result, we proudly partner with nonprofits to support programs that offer services to those transitioning from rehabilitation centers, prisons, and any other institutional type setting. We are especially grateful for the work that we do in downtown Los Angeles, where Grandma Biddy served her community and where her homestead was located. In the history of America, the accomplishments of Blacks, and Black women in particular, normally go unrecognized or under-recognized. As descendants of Biddy Mason, it was ingrained in us that it was our responsibility to be the keepers of our family's legacy. Biddy Mason will forever be connected to the history of early Los Angeles because she helped shape this city and she deserves to be celebrated for her contributions in making Los Angeles what it is today. Our family are grateful to LACMA and Snapchat for shining a light on our grandmother's story. And we hope the city of Los Angeles will one day honor Grandma Biddy by renaming Spring Street after her. Biddy Mason is more than just the story of an early Los Angeles pioneer. She is an American story. My sister Robin Cox fights to make changes through policy, and she always says, Grandma Biddy provides a clear example of the promise of what America could be if it were to remove systemic barriers that continue to oppress historically marginalized people. Ultimately, Biddy Mason is a living demonstration of how great this country could be, how great this country would be if it were to honor the principles of equality and justice for all, and actually guarantee that Black lives do matter. She is an example of what Black people can accomplish when given the opportunity to be great.
Thank you, Cheryl. That introduction and historical overview of Bridget Biddy Mason was amazing and only underscores just not only the contributions that we've seen, but also the ones that are seldomly known. And so I hope we can continue to learn more about Biddy Mason beyond this point. But to transition, I would like to introduce the curator of this project, Liz Andrews. Liz Andrews is an artist, curator, museum professional, and leader dedicated to the arts and social justice. For nearly 5 years, Liz Andrews was an executive administrator in the director's office of LACMA. Liz will open 2 shows at LACMA with co-curator Christine E. Kim in November, the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery's Obama Portraits Tour, and a companion exhibition, Black American Portraits. On August 2nd, Liz began her role as the executive director of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, the only museum in the nation dedicated to the work of Black women. Now, with this introduction, I'd like to transition to Liz Andrews. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyree, and welcome everyone to this very exciting program. Today, we are celebrating the 203rd birthday of Bridget Biddy Mason. I'm broadcasting today from Georgia, which is where she was born on August 15th, 1818, into slavery. And as we heard earlier, her legacy lives on multiple levels, through the first AME church, through multiple descendants, through midwifery, and also through this augmented reality monument. It was really an honor to work with LACMA and with the lens creators at Snapchat and their team, and the artist Ada Pinkston to bring Biddy Mason's legacy to life. As the director of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, I have always been and continue to be dedicated to the history of Black women, as well as the art of Black women artists. And so this is a really special occasion for all of us today. At a moment in time when the nation is reconsidering who should be honored in bronze and marble and stone, LACMA and Snapchat with the Monumental Perspectives project have taken on this idea of monumentality to honor histories that are not usually told, like this one of Biddy Mason. And so without further ado, I would love to show you a preview of what this augmented reality monument, The Open Hand is Blessed, looks like.
AR has a lot of potential for having a space for public interaction and conversation outside of this brick and mortar architecture that we usually see in monumental spaces. My name is Ada Pinkston. I am the artist behind the Open Hand lens that is a monument to the life of Biddy Mason. And And then Magic Johnson Park is a public place that would allow more people to experience it. A lot of people walk around Magic Johnson Park, and also there's this body of water that I wanted people to interact with when opening up the lens. I want users to feel more inspired to do the research of the stories of the past in the cities and sites that they live in after experiencing the lens, and specifically researching the gaps in the stories of the past.
Now I would like to introduce the incredible artist who has brought us all together, the creator of The Open Hand is Blessed, Ada Pinkston. Ada Pinkston is an unbound multimedia artist, educator, and cultural worker living and working in Baltimore, Maryland. She is a lecturer at Towson University, and her work has been presented at the Smithsonian Arts and Industries Building, the Walters Art Museum, the Pearl Museum, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Transmodern Performance Film Festival, along with several other venues. Her work is dedicated to the intersection of imagined histories and socio-political realities on our bodies using performance, digital media, and mixed media sculptures and installations. Her work is currently on view in Washington, D.C. at Plain Sight Gallery and at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And it was really special to work on her with this project because it pushed her work into literally another dimension, augmented reality. All right. Welcome, Ada.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Liz. And I think everyone can hear me now? Yes? Okay, cool. And thank you to LACMA and Snapchat for facilitating this conversation and creating a space to honor the life of Biddy Mason. We are in the midst of a movement to create counter narratives to dominant historical accounts. Across the world, artists and activists, journalists and historians are working to create and disseminate new stories of the past that deconstruct current systems and structures of power. There are countless memory workers who are recounting history and the Eurocentric time-space continuum that renders our understanding of stories of the past as it relates to the global colonial project. Monuments are a part of this fabrication of colonial time standards. And I see my work as a part of this movement to break these standards and to remember what really happened before present day knowledge structures violently silenced the truth. In collaboration with Snapchat Lens creators Charles Hamblin and Sutu, we made this monument to recognize the life and legacy of Biddy Mason because her name has been intentionally written out of the canon of the story of Los Angeles and the story of this country. I selected footage from online archives of the Schomburg and digital libraries that focus on California's Black history. When we think about monuments, we think of stone, cement, bronze, men on horses. And when I started to create the storyboard, I thought about how I wanted to create this augmented reality monument to exist as a portal to consider another time and to engage with a memorial space for the public that is digital or rendered in a digital world and digital environment. When I started to do my research on Black Los Angeles, my spirit connected to the story of Biddy Mason deeply. When I read the phrase, "The open hand is blessed, for it gives as much as it receives," I knew that was where this work had to go. These particular words of Biddy Mason resonated with me because it was a statement that my great-grandmother told my family. My family is also from Mississippi, so I imagine that there's some type of spirit connection. Tomorrow is my grandmother's birthday, and today is Biddy Mason's birthday. And there are few monuments that recognize Black women in Los Angeles. There are few monuments that recognize Black women in the state of California. There are few monuments that recognize Black women in the country. Yet there are hundreds of monuments and streets and roads that still stand and recognize and honor the lost cause of Confederacy states. The first iteration of a monument for Biddy Mason was made by Betty Saar. It exists behind an office building in downtown Los Angeles, one of the sites where she once owned her land. And I wanted this AR monument to exist in the digital space for people who can't necessarily go to Los Angeles to the site of Betty Saar's memorial. Memories only exist when we acknowledge them. The passage of time has rendered her story invisible to many. When I asked my cousin, who was an alumnus of Venice High School, if he ever heard of Biddy Mason, he told me no. This augmented reality memorial has layers of images to reanimate parts of her story that were not documented. And I see the open hand is always blessed as a portal, again, across this time-space continuum. The person whose voice is included in this work is my aunt, Mama Dolly. She also traveled from Mississippi to California at a very different time and space. She often tells me that when she arrived in Los Angeles in the 70s, most of what we know of Santa Monica, all the strip malls that we see in Santa Monica, they were once orange groves. Now Mama Dolly has dementia and her personal connection to memories have become cloudy. The ambient sound in the background was made by Jamal Moore, who was an experimental sound artist based in Baltimore, who once studied with Wadada Leo Smith. Time-based media is a tool to create portals and breaks and fissures and break down this time-space continuum. And I'm very thankful to Liz Andrews for supporting this project. And I'm also, again, I'm gonna say very thankful to LACMA and Snapchat for providing me this opportunity to begin this journey of breaking down the time space continuum in half to create new memorial spaces for a woman whose legacy deserves to be remembered. And I'm excited to hear the words of these poets who will share new work in response to her life and legacy. And yeah.
Thank you, Ada, for that overview and just the emphasis behind your work. And I'd be remiss to not even see the significance of the discussion of portals and time, because I think that's exactly what these poets are going to do, transport us back and forth through time to understand the legacy of Biddy Mason. Before we dive into the poets, I'd like to encourage you all to use the chat function and to use those emojis, whether they're hearts or what have you, so that we know that you are with us today. And as you prepare those comments into the chat, I'd like to introduce you to the first poet of the night. So get your thumbs ready to snap in the chat function, because Tanya Ingram is a poet, an author, and a Cincinnati native, Bronx-bred introvert, a mental health and lupus advocate, a kidney transplant hopeful, a cat auntie, and a lover of Tom Hardy and The Office. A friend, creative daydreamer, and Virgo, Tanya's writing explores the necessity in taking care of ourselves, especially on the days we feel unworthy. Tanya is a graduate of New York University and Otis College of Art and Design, and Tanya currently resides in Los Angeles, California. And now, without further ado, we have Tanya Ingram.
Hi, everyone. And again, welcome to Poetry in Color. It is an honor to be able to be reading, to be celebrating the life and legacy of Biddy Mason. Happy birthday, Biddy Mason. And I want to share two poems. The first is not an original poem. It's by Maya Angelou, but it speaks to the resiliency of Biddy Mason. When I think of Biddy Mason, I think of resiliency. When I think of Black people, I think of resiliency. When I think of Black women, I think of resiliency. So I'm going to share a poem by Maya Angelou and then a poem that I wrote personally to my own experiences dealing with resiliency. So thank you all. Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like tides, with the certainty of tides. Just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging up in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a Black ocean leaping and wide. Welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. And the second poem is entitled Questions for the Day After a Mental Breakdown. Have you ever been angry with God? Have you ever belonged to a body? Have you ever been a body you didn't belong to? Have you ever been yours, been ill, been a witness at your own funeral, clean house and still missed a spot? Have you ever sat in a bed and denied mourning? Was it in a hospital? Was it in a hotel of a body you do not know? Was it home? Have you ever missed a mother who is still alive? Are you still alive? Where is your father? Is he God? Where is the wound? Does it have a pulse? What is lupus? Can it peel skin like a ripe orange? Is it a body in war with itself? Are you at war with your kidneys, with the ugly you named before your brilliance, with the men who did not stay? What is strength? Does it keep an address? When was your first kiss? Did it matter? Did it hurt? The needles, the IV, the chemo, the dialysis, the catheters, the doctor with bad news, the TV with bad news. Will it get better? Does better have a name? Is it a body? Is it yours? Will it arrive tomorrow? Can you hold on until then? Thank you.
I'll say thank you, Tanya. And can you hear me? Excellent.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Those two poems are really powerful. And I would love to hear your process when you're arriving, especially to the second one. And as you can tell from the chat to the right of me, they're going off in celebration of what you just brought us to and through. So please elaborate further.
Absolutely. So I have an incurable disease called lupus, and resiliency and strength is a word that I have to put on every day just to get through it. And even if I didn't have an incurable disease, being a Black woman in America is already enough. So writing poetry is my way to understand, is my way to give my own history. We're here celebrating the history, the life, the legacy of Biddy Mason, and it's my narrative is adding to hers, is to say, I'm still here. Poetry allows me to say I'm still here, that despite whatever is going on, despite an illness that's literally attacking me, despite all of it, I'm still showing up. Poetry is my tool. It's Biddy Mason was able to start, I know the first AME church, was a midwife, did all of these incredible things to add to her legacy. And I want to do that with poetry. I want to let myself know that I belong, and I want to let others know that they belong, that it's okay to show up as you are, whether you're fighting the day, a disease, whatever, you're here, and that matters.
And the word that keeps reverberating throughout your poems and your statements is resilience. Like, what does resilience mean, especially as a Black woman? And how do you use your words to fight back and counter those narratives, even about yourself, and especially historical figures like Biddy too?
Absolutely. To me, resiliency is showing up despite. And that means showing up as you are. You don't have to have it together. Like, I just don't show up as you are. Like, today I'm like, you know what, I'm here. And that counts for everything. So that's resiliency to me. This idea of strength not being, I need to have it all together, but as I am right now, this is me, that's resiliency. So we're all being resilient by showing up. Biddy Mason was resilient by doing what she did. She was born a slave, and still was able to accomplish so much in her life. That's resiliency. I can say, we say born a slave, but that holds so much weight, that the everyday, the ins and outs of that's resiliency. And that, incorporating that into the everyday, into why we're here right now, celebrating someone's life who literally is the epitome of strength, the resiliency of showing up despite slavery. We show up in all the ways that we can. And that is incredibly powerful, especially for people like us, it's beautiful. It's our song, it's our poetry, it's our legacy.
Right.
I'm just so honored to be a small part of that.
And every poem you shared with us today gave us a glimpse of what, not only what resilience can be, but what resilience ought to look like. And thank you for that strength. That is definitely aligned with the legacy of Biddy Mason. So for those in the chat, feel free to give your hand claps so that Tanya can see them. And we are going to prepare for our next poem. And thank you again, Tanya. You are incredible.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the night.
Well, next up, ladies and gentlemen, we have Dorothy Mathis. And this is a poem you didn't know you were waiting for. Who is Dorothy Mathis? Well, Dora is a freelance writer whose interests include the intersection of race and gender in pop culture, race and class issues in maternal health, and Black family histories. Her work has appeared in outlets including the New York Times, The Atlantic, Playboy, Bitch Media, and Zora magazine. Dora is the winner of the 2020 Blood Orange Review Contest in nonfiction and a 2020 Vana Voices Workshop alum. A former staff writer at romper.com, Dora was recently named a finalist for the 2021 Tin House Parent Residency. She lives in Maryland with her husband and 3 children. And now, without further ado, we have Dorothy Mathis with a poem of her. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here. The poem I'm going to read is called What Biddy Mason Built. She was her mother's little bitty thing, born under a summer sky as vast as longing, Bridget, child of strength, heart song of Africans stolen from a land her hands and feet never touched. Biddy breathed, unfree. Every inhale, a hot resistance. She learned at the skirts of mothers whose sighs the wind carried, and she would grow strong, feet steady, despite the dead weight of cotton in her sack, hands outstretched to catch babies or pluck the herbs for poultice or fever, to soothe heartache that medicine could never mend. And when the slaver demanded, Biddy walked 1,700 miles west from Mississippi, skirts wet with mud, her back heavy with baby Harriet, behind 300 wagons of white folks. She tended livestock while she chafed under her own yoke. I imagine she lay listening to wolves howl into the fathomless night and dreamed of her own freedom cry echoing into the daughters curled at her bosom. And when the slaver demanded, Biddy walked again to the hills of the Californios, the dust of the rutted Mormon trail clouding behind her, but she breathed unfree in a free land where hot resistance could mean death before your next inhale. Biddy bided her time until love bid her speak. I do not wish to be separated from my children and do not in such case wish to go. And so freed, with the law finally honoring her humanity, Biddy stayed, and how fitting she named herself Mason, because so freed, Biddy built. And when she demanded, from the strength of her open hand, from the depths of her heart, she gave. The steady feet that carried her from plantation to plains supported her mission of sheltering the orphans, of soothing the shackles, of delivering the little bitty things, of tending the indigent, of feeding the hungry when their lives washed down rivers. She flooded Los Angeles with good. And when she demanded, Grandma Mason stood on her own 2 feet as a physician's equal, a nurse in no man's property, a philanthropist with generosity as vast as her longing for freedom. But what does it mean to be free forever? Hands and feet unbound, surrounded by sighs we ignore. What is liberation unshared with others? Biddy Mason built her community because the first sanctuary that sheltered her was love. And standing upon that foundation, Biddy Masons, we built up our own. Thank you.
I'm snapping over here. Dara, that was so powerful, so powerful. You gotta give us the process behind it, because I heard the double entendre of little itty bitty. I was over here hyperventilating with excitement. Please give us the process in making this poem for us today.
Well, what really stood out to me, no pun intended, was the fact that she walked all those miles across the country. And I thought about what it would feel like in your body to walk that long and that far and to stare behind people who were in comfort at your expense. And I also thought about the quote, "The open hand is blessed." And those two images to me formed a tandem. In a religious context, hands and feet are a metaphor for service to the community. I've heard be the hands and feet of Jesus. And with that, especially given her founding of the first AME church in Los Angeles, I thought it was fitting to focus on what Biddy did once her hands and feet were no longer shackled. And it really pointed out to me how much we can accomplish with real agency. And even in her time, she wasn't granted full agency. I can't even say that we are now granted full agency, but with the agency that she was given back to her from her innate, from what she was owed, I think that she taught us a valuable lesson that will keep on repeating throughout history and throughout her legacies, that liberation is not worth much if you cannot share it with others. Liberation is not a solo project. Liberation is a community endeavor.
You use the word agency. Can you expound a little bit further on what agency means to you as a poet, as a writer, and also how we can actualize our own agency after such a powerful poem that you've shared about Biddy.
I think for me, agency is about will. Can you do what your heart wills? Can you do what your body wills? How free are you to move? And what are the constraints that bind you? Agency for me is the opportunity to act without those constraints, whether they be mental, whether they be emotional, whether they be enacted by policy and colonial projects, as Liz Andrews so eloquently stated. And agency for me through the vehicle of this poem helps to remind me that no matter where I go, and no matter where I am on this earth and in this country, that a part of my responsibility as a woman with whatever agency I am given, whatever agency I have, is to engage with the community underneath my feet, is to engage with not just the earth, but the people to the left and the right of me, to remind others that I can't really call myself free if no one else is.
Well, that's quite a place to leave off on. And Dara, thank you for giving us a piece of your agency and helping us actualize the liberation that Biddy had always envisioned for us all to partake in.
I am
Thank you.
honored. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And if you can look at the chat, you can also see that I am not a solo in this larger choir of voices that are celebrating you as you celebrate us in Biddy Mason's life. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And everyone who hasn't in the chat, feel free to show Dara some love because she gave a piece of her heart to us this afternoon. Well, we come to the trifecta of this evening in celebrating Bridget Biddy Mason, and I'm excited to bring you a poet that I have known for some time and is very special. Next up, we have Fumilola Fagbamila, who is a Nigerian American playwright, actress, and professor. Her internationally touring stage play on the complexities of Black political identity, The Intersection, has been met with critical acclaim by thinkers and artists such as Angela Davis and Erykah Badu. The production premiered at the Pan-African Film Festival in 2018 and has staged in venues across the US, England, France, the Netherlands, and Brazil. Fumilola currently serves as a professor of Pan-African Studies at California State University, LA, and her work was honored by the US Congress in both 2015 and 2018. And her writing and social commentary have been featured in publications such as The Guardian, BBC News, and NPR. And so without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Fumilola to bless us on the mic.
Hello, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here with you. I'm so grateful to have the wonderful honor of lifting up Biddy Mason's name, lifting up her legacy. Thank you to LACMA. Thank you to Cello. Thank you to everyone who's had their hands in bringing this project to life. Thank you, Ada, for your brilliant work in this. And my poem is focusing a bit on Biddy Mason's work as a midwife because it really resonated with me in a very particular way. So I'll start it off like this. Bridget Biddy Mason said that if you hold your hand closed, nothing good can come in. The open hand is blessed, for it gives in abundance as it receives. And I believe I agree, considering a life where she was healing and revealing as a brilliant midwife. How do I know her hand was open? Because she graciously gave to the poor and the hungry, once referred to as a slave, but she found her own name. With an unrelenting spirit into this life she came. Born in the South, became an icon of the West. With the heart of a healer, it was beating in her chest. 3 kids of her own, the youngest strapped to her back, striving for a life where they would know no lack. 1,700 miles through the mud and the flood and the ice and the wind and the heat. Let me repeat, she walked 1,700 miles to a new land in the West. Little did she know that there her hand would be blessed. Have you opened your hand to life? presented yourself as a vessel for the goodness and reciprocity, it can make this life special. If we open our hand to life, there are endless possibilities. You might just find that deep behind the fear, there is a clarity that Biddy walked with, that allowed her to do the necessary things to introduce a life that is new. A midwife is a healer, a revealer. You will see that if you look at Biddy's life, you will find divinity. It is divine to be helpful, loving, and open. It is divine to take the herbs and to help heal the broken. It is divine to do the alchemy that Biddy once did, a deep vow of gratitude for a life tremendously lived. The open hand is blessed. May we open our hands to offer the words and actions that will help heal this land. May your hand be blessed as it gives and receives, with the intention that we all might live abundantly.
Fumilola, dropping bars as always, dropping gems. Please give us the backstory, the process for this original poem, because you took us there and back, and particularly an emphasis on her role as a midwife, which we commonly now know as a doula. Can you share with us a little bit about the process on this?
Yes, I am just very deeply interested and love the work of doulas, of midwives. I just think it's a glorious thing to be the welcoming committee. And I think it is a reflection of Biddy Mason's philosophy in a very particular way. And I want to touch on Biddy Mason's philosophy in a very particular way, but before I say that, I will say that in terms of actually writing the actual poem, my first step is always to move myself out of the way. Whenever I go to write anything, particularly a creative work. And what I mean by that is, of course, I'm the vessel, but to move my ego out of the way, the need for it to be brilliant and all of these things, no, but rather the need is for it to say what it's supposed to say. I think that while I was excited and happy to write about Biddy Mason's life is because the open hand quote, the open hand is blessed quote in her philosophy, I agree with deeply, but in a way where I think that sometimes it gets overlooked how difficult it actually is to walk that life, to offer yourself as a vessel for service while also not sacrificing yourself for the service of others. It's a very interesting thing that I think humans are still trying to figure out how to contend with. We would like for our institutions and our practices and our culture and our society to be a reflection of Biddy Mason's words, which is that we are here to operate in a process of reciprocity, mutuality, cooperation. That is justice in action. That is love in action. That is care in action. And that if we could embody that in our step and in our institutions, in our laws, in our way of being, that the world, we would be able to mitigate and remove and, obliterate so much of the suffering that exists. And so I just think that when it comes to Biddy Mason's legacy, this Black woman who went through these unhuman circumstances, and at the end of it was like, I'm still here to help when a smallpox epidemic outbreak. To be able to live a life of service after the world has tried to take so much from you, it's a thing we don't talk about that much, but burnout is a very particular thing in this moment as we're talking about even the aftermath of 2020 and the ways that Black women particularly had to show up. We're trying to now mitigate a culture or challenge a culture that asks Black women to sacrifice themselves for others while also living a life where we are all giving and receiving with each other, that balance. And so I think that Biddy's life is an example of what we can aspire to, reciprocity.
Perfect. What is something you want to leave us with as an audience. Lastly, after such a stirring poem like that?
Keep trying. Keep trying. And it's like, that sounds very simple, but every day, Tanya mentioned this, like, just keep trying. Give yourself the space to rest, give yourself the space to feed and nurture yourself. Biddy Mason lived a deeply abundant life, right? And it's particularly thinking about what she was able to build, the just all that she was able to even gain in her life, whether abundance spiritually, financially in her life. And so give and receive, try your best, even when you just feel like you don't have anything left. You just kind of reset, take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a very interesting world. So let that balance be your mantra. Let that balance be your mantra.
Powerful. Thank you, Fumi, for this thought-provoking poem. And if Biddy Mason can get through an epidemic like smallpox, surely we can get through this pandemic of which we're undergoing, and using her resiliency, her agency, and attempting to live a life abundantly, as you articulated, is clearly the pathway to liberation. So thank you. And if you can look in the chat as well, there's an overwhelming response for you and what you gave today, and let that be something that people give back to you in celebration of your words. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Always. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the close of LACMA's Poetry in Color. And I am so profoundly privileged to be your host today. It has been a stirring night, and you all have responded in kind to such a moving evening. Today, again, we celebrate Biddy Mason's birthday, and we celebrate her descendants who are keeping her memory alive familially. But let us all just take a piece of Biddy today and apply it throughout our week, our month, and the rest of this year, actualizing our resiliency, our agency, and a life more abundant.
Tyree, you're muted. Can you reset after happy birthday, Biddy? Thank you so much.
Of course. No worries. And I seem to be muted. I want to say thank you, and let us celebrate Bridget Biddy Mason, and give credit to everyone at LACMA and at Snapchat who made this evening possible. You all have been too kind, and we are really grateful to collaborate with you. Let's continue to be keepers of the city's legacy like Bridget Biddy Mason. And I am your host, Tyree Boyd-Pates from the Autry Museum, signing off. And hopefully we look forward to crossing paths again.